We're going to be talking about a somewhat different topic. It's a topic that normally doesn't end up in a BOF, but which is building a stable future for the RIPE NCC and by extension, RIPE itself. And the sort of the fundamental question behind that is, we're now over 30 years old. Is the way we've structured ourselves in the organic way it's grown, are we still fit for purpose? And this is not meant as any attack on where we are right now, but I do think it is time, as I explained in my RIPE Labs article last month, that we need to have a closer look at what is the current landscape we're operating in, and are we set up in an optimal way to handle the challenges that we have here right now. So, where are we now? The story until now. Here we go. The RIPE Labs article, and I took an excerpt out of it, which is what we need to consider now is the bigger picture about how to move the RIPE NCC forward. The past several years have shown us that we have far outgrown the current structure for organization and governance. New pressures in the RIR system and new stakeholders we're accountable to have changed the landscape we operate in. On top of this, the current funding model of the RIPE NCC is not sustainable. We now have to sit down and do the hard work of completely reinventing how we manage our membership and our funding, while taking into account how we can mitigate current risks and future-proof the RIPE NCC. Also important for this discussion, the timeline for implementation for this. So we have a scope and we have a timeline for this. So really what we're talking about is any potential changes in structure will be from 2027 onwards. This will give us, as a community, about 1.5 years of time to carefully consider where we are, what we want to do, get a consensus on that, and then 1 year to actually implement that. So that's where we are. The agenda for today is four topics. If we don't get to all of the topics today, then we'll figure out a way to cover that through some other means. They follow one from another. And what I like to do is, if we hit 7 and we're not done yet, then I do want to have a quick talk about next steps. What do we feel we should do after this? Not on the agenda is specific work for the community, because the community doesn't need a BOF. The community has a community plenary and chairs, like one sitting right there. And examples of those topics would be like, how does the community create output, and what is the exact relationship between the community and RIPE NCC? Those are topics that would warrant a discussion in the RIPE community itself, which have not necessarily in this construct. So the RIPE Compact, what in Earth's name is a compact? So while writing these slides, I was trying to come up with what is sort of the name for the entirety of what we're doing here. Is the RIPE community. It is the RIPE NCC, the RIPE NCC membership. I mean, we certainly have seen that those are necessarily not aligned completely. Community leadership, the RIPE NCC executive board. So this is a collaboration between those entities, sort of flying in sort of a loose formation in a collaborative compact. What is a collaborative compact? They are sort of a combination between formal and informal agreements that focus on 4 areas of agreement: how you work together, how you think together, how you work with conflicts, and how you manage your own behavior. In that structure, I'd like to set the discussion. It's not just about RIPE NCC, it is about the whole picture. Where are we? Where do we want to be? Further introducing this, for lack of other documentation, there's that was too fast. The RIPE NCC strategic goals for 2022 to 2026. Support an open, inclusive, you can read this for yourself. What I've tried to extract from this is the objective for the compact as a whole. So not just RIPE NCC, but the whole collaboration. And what I ended up with was we need to enable our community to operate one secure, stable, resilient, global internet. And those are all, I capitalize them because they're all individual qualities. And some of them are intertwined, some of them are completely independent, and some of them are highly debatable. Secure has wildly different meanings for different groups of people, for example. But what do we need for that? In order to get there, we need a trusted, efficient, accurate, and resilient registry. We need an open, inclusive, and engaged RIPE community. And we need insightful, reliable, and timely data about the internet and its operations, for which, in the end, we need a stable organization with robust governance and diverse and competent staff. Now, this is the first point where I'm just going to open it up and see what people have to say about this, which I'm probably going to, depending on how much people are going to run up to a microphone, I'm probably going to let go for 15, 20 minutes. Do we agree with this? Or is this wildly off the mark? And if so, what should it be? Over to our chairs.
Please. Thank you, Remco. Jim Reid, just a random punter off the street representing nobody but myself. I broadly agree with what you put on the previous slide, but one thing I would say about that was in terms of gathering data, I think probably one thing that's important that's been missed from that is impartial or independent, because a lot of data sources are somehow tainted because of the fact they've got a commercial bias or they're trying to pursue a specific agenda. So I suggest adding impartial as part of one of those data requirements.
That's very, very good. Thank you.
Peter.
Peter Hessler from Zayo. For the most part, we agree with this. And like Jim said, there's probably a few minor things that we can add and tweak, but essentially, I believe you're correct.
Sander?
Hi, Sander Stefan as me. Yeah, I agree. I think these there's always wordsmithing to be done, but even after you're finished. But in roughly, yes, I think you got it right. Thank you.
Tina.
Hi, Tina Morris, AWS, but as with everybody today, I think we're speaking with all of our experience in the RIPE community. First, I want to say this organization has changed dramatically from its inception, as you've noted, but also point out that you are now managing assets worth billions and billions of dollars. And that brings an entirely different demographic to paying attention. And that means this organization has to scale appropriately. Also, you can't treat RIPE services as a la carte. There are critical network infrastructures like RPKI that cannot be optional. And you have to support those things. Atlas, things like that are used by so many services, and you can't just pick and choose as a customer which one you're going to use. That billing model doesn't work. Also, your strategic goals, for the record, are more like operational guidelines. They're not goals. Goals are specific, achievable, time-bound, measurable, and communicated to the community. There's no way for us to see them or see what's being done specifically to organize this. And I'll save my rest for the next section.
That's much appreciated.
Thank you.
And,
Sergey, then Daniel, then Tobias.
Sergey Masaidov, Network Group RIPE NCC member. Looking at the goals here on the screen, I would like to have more better understanding of where are we in this list, considering this is work items. So do we have a trusted registry now? Do we have an efficient registry? Do we have a accurate registry now? Unless I will hear the answer, I cannot predict or propose the stable future for the RIPE NCC. Does the board consider that we have enough trusted and efficient registry now?
I mean, I'm not here standing on behalf of the board, so you'd have to ask the board that. But I think that, and there's a lot of devil in the detail here. All of these qualities are, in a sense, subjective. So it's really about what do you consider trusted? What do you consider efficient?
Not just me, actually, everybody here in this room.
No, but everyone has their own subjective views on that. So if you disagree with this statement, I mean, this is an ambition. This is what we want to have, right? If you don't think we have it right now, then there is work to be done. This is not about now. This is what we want to aspire, what we want to get to. So if you want clarification on that, then I think having more clarification on this, and I'll accept input from everyone here. That's why I'm standing here.
With this, I can only say that I like the goal.
Okay, that's something.
Daniel.
Hi, Daniel Kahnberg. I have some history with RIPE and the RIPE NCC. I'm currently an employee of the RIPE NCC, actually the longest serving one. To continue a little bit about what Jim Reed said, I think if you look at the bottom line there, I'm missing elements of neutrality, as Jim said, and trust in the organization. I think the immense success we have had in the past building all this up is because we trusted each other, and we consciously worked on establishing and maintaining trust and faith in the community, with the community, and the NCC always strives to do that. And I think if you describe the organization, there needs to be an element of that in there. I don't want to be wordsmithing right now, but I think that's very, very essential, including, and that also speaks to the neutrality.
So a quick comment to that. I take your comments to heart. This is about the whole structure. This is not specifically about the NCC as an administrator. We'll get to that next.
Both. And
Good.
I think, I think, so I disagree a little bit. I think, yes, it's about the whole thing, but especially the organization that does the operational bit needs to be trustworthy and needs to be trusted and needs to be constantly reassure itself that it has the trust of the community. And that's why I missed that word.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tobias.
So Tobias Wiebig, Max Planck Institute for Informatics, speaking for myself. I would like to pick on the point of goals. Goals generally have the tendency of going somewhere and developing somewhere. I think we need also a very strong emphasis on maintaining, on catering, and on keeping this environment alive and there. The question is, do we really need a goal to get somewhere, or do we just have to make sure that what we have is not destroyed?
Absolutely. And I think that if the outcome of this whole thing is that we're perfect as we are, or there's no major steps needed, then that's a perfect outcome as well, right?
Sander. Hi, Sander Stefan again. I was thinking like it's easy to go like, yes, I agree with what's here, but then I was thinking like, what's not there? What am I missing something? And I actually realized that there is more that is being done. Like the RIPE NCC represents this community in communications with governments, in other fora, and shouldn't that also be part of the requirements?
Well, this is, so again, this is, and I understand that this is a bit of an odd one, because I'm trying to establish our collaborative goals here.
Yeah.
And the NCC as sort of the administrative or executive arm of that, of course, will have to do things representing this wider group.
Yeah, but looking at the sentence, it says enable the community operate one secure, etc. internet. Is having good representation in these forums a requirement for that? And I think it is.
Oh, that's good feedback.
Yeah.
Neil O'Reilly. I'm vice chair of RIPE, and I'm also a long-time participant in RIPE. And one of the things that I think needs to be made explicit here is what values we want to base the realization of these specific objectives on. And that may be in one of your later slides. I have to say that although I've had the chance to review them, I don't recall whether that's made explicit, but we need to ground all of this in the values that are shared across the collection of existing stakeholders and which we would want to share with new stakeholders that we may have to engage.
Thank you.
Yep, Wolfgang Zenker.de, speaking for myself. As someone mentioned, the RIPE and the RIPE NCC is now managing assets worth a lot of money, and that will undoubtedly lead to people acting in bad faith, trying to influence the community. And currently, I'm not sure how we manage to stay open, inclusive, engaged, and a trustful community, while at the same time keeping bad faith actors out of it. So just a point to think about.
That is an excellent point.
So Tobias Siebig, MPI Informatics for myself again. Just to clarify, I don't mean that we have to preserve the organization as is. I mean that we have to preserve what we have, the open internet. And I'm also not closing my eyes towards the reality of these values being attributed to IP addresses, where we V6 said they're not considered property. And I think the organization may have to change to preserve that. But the goal should not be something where we go somewhere, where we develop, but where we focus on preserving our open internet. Because if we destroy it in the face of money, it's gone. We can't buy it back.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 20 past. How long you want this part to go?
We have 3 more people at the mics. I think we should let them have a go.
Okay.
Yeah, so after that, we will close the queue.
Thank you. Gil Felsinius speaking for myself. I wanted to pick up on something that was one of the kind of missing pieces was the whole speaking on behalf of us, which is so important right now because there is that ugly thing called internet governance. We used to run the network. We used to do it the way we wanted. Those days are long gone. And now the decisions about how the network should be done are done at a completely different level. And there's huge vacuum there where people need to be there talking for the technical community. And I think we have a very strong role in that.
Thank you.
I'm Pavel. I'm a candidate for RIPE NCC board. I would like to add my small contribution to these goals. Of course, it's documented in articles of association of RIPE NCC that we are association. And purpose of association is to explain and deliver what members of this association want. It may be excessive, but my point that we need as very first goal to reflect and help and implement what members want. It should be as very first, I would say, main point, and then everything else, because all the time we need to keep in mind what challenge we have. So just mention it, governance, regulation, financial risks. And I think we need to look, when we look at goals of our association, we need to look all the time. First, its meaning and purpose and interest of members.
Thank you. I think, I mean, you're obviously more recent on the Articles of Association than I am, but I think that at least in the spirit, RIPE NCC was set up to support the community and is funded by the members, which were back then called contributors, to make the confusion less obvious. So I think that, yes, there is absolutely a point, and this is actually the exact discrepancy that has crept in, right? And I think that that's something that's one of the reasons why we're here and talking about this. Thank you.
Okay, we are cutting the queue after Paul. So please.
Hi, I'm Marlene with Amazon. I think that having objectives are obviously good, but I think that we don't want to fall under the same problem that happens with other nonprofits, which is you kind of throw out words and not really things to measure. Because, for example, diversity, insightful, trusted, like we need to have, if you're going to put words towards a goal, you need to have a kind of like a baseline definition of what that is. And I think that the community needs to kind of come together to pick those words or what you want them to represent.
Clarify what that means.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Thank you. Anything, sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead.
Sure. And then a follow-up to that, once you have your definitions and kind of like a clear goal for your objective, then I would want to see like how you're going to measure up against those goals to see how you're tracking success. But you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dimitri.
Thanks, Dmytro Kochmanuk. I feel like I wasn't fine. Be the last before. Well, thank you for bringing this. You said the compact, and of course, I remember the United Nations Global Digital Compact. They're about to pass the agenda. They're going to regulate our internet in their way if we don't do this ourselves. So please keep up the good work. And also, I would say it's not just about RIP NCC. It's about RIR Group, the NRO. We have a problem. We had one specific member of a FRENIC destroying the RIR, and everybody knows how it works. And let's not pretend we are all nice and rosy and the ponies are about to fly to the moon. We have a problem, and it's not our problem, it's externality. And we have lots of black swans headed away. But let me say this, we should start with restoring trust, if we have it a bit shattered, of the organization and of the board. And I'm not saying it's so bad, but I have seen this happening before. I have seen a lot of bad words being said about NCC that, board this, board that. That's actually quite normal. If they don't critique you, they just ignore you. So be happy. But we should also be like a two-way communicators, right? So maybe we should have a task force. So that's my idea, because 1 hour isn't enough. And thank you for starting this new effort. And hopefully it's not take as long as UN usually does.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thanks, Remco. Paul Wilson from APNIC. If I've got the last word, a word that I think is missing is stewardship. I think the registry and the community through the policy process has got a really important role in stewardship of the resources that are critical to internet operation. And what we've been doing collectively over the years is deregulating and taking hands off stewardship. And I think we're in an environment where, as Tina said, and as people have said, the scale, their value, the pressures are getting higher and higher. And I don't feel that sort of creeping deregulation represents the sort of stewardship that's actually needed. And if we're not collectively able to address that and bring things a bit back towards more active stewardship, then I really think someone else is going to want to do it for us. So I think that's a word that I'd suggest to consider. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
We closed the queue, but we may
this is a
do the
very-
exception for now.
It's Neil O'Reilly, RIPE Vice Chair. A very quick reaction to Dimitro's remark. It's not that we have to do better at self-regulation or the regulators will regulate us in their own particular way. We have to recognize the scope that we have for self-regulation and do a good job of that, and recognize that legislators and regulators are going to legislate and regulate. And we have to recognize the complementarity of competences and engage with and work with people who have different needs to regulate what we have lovingly developed over the years and work with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, Remco.
Thank you. Yes. Well,
I will steal you one water.
So let's move on. Thank you all for your contribution so far. This has been extremely helpful. Structuring RIPE NCC. Now, so if you go back to one of the founding documents of the RIPE NCC in its current structure, RIPE 161, and it's actually available online, and it's a good read. So there were criteria for RIPE NCC as an organization, and filling in some of the points that Daniel made. Good service, neutral, impartial, non-exclusive, not for profit, with an executive committee which represents the various interests of the contributors, which is the old word for what we now call members. Resistant to hostile takeover or control by any single party. Subject to as little taxation as possible. I'm not sure if I write that down in 2024. Supports the credible function as an industry self-regulation organization. And finally, I felt that was important. There was an organization before RIPE NCC. RIPE NCC was part of RARE, which is now called Terina these days, and had 30 employees when it started. So one of the key things there was that the employee should maintain their contractual and tax rights. Issues and caveats on the current structure. So the current legal structure is based on criteria that were relevant in 1997. The overriding reasons why the structure is what it is right now is because it was cheap and it limited tax exposure. The community policies are enforcing engagement structures on RIPE NCC. They're outdated. There's a whole bunch of policy remnants about how do we do membership, what are PI holders, etc. We have some constraints in how we can organize ourselves. There's actually 2 external documents that describe what RARs in terms of internet registries at least should look like, described in RFC 7020. In case you weren't up to date with that, this is the new version of RFC 2050. I had to look that up as well. And the ICP2 document, which is currently under review again. And Athena from RIPE NCC did an article about that last month. Also, the focus has very much shifted from resource distribution to registry accuracy and compliance. No further explanation needed. We have the 20 billion in assets that we're apparently managing. And the current membership structure not really allows room for growth anymore. For the first time, the number of paying members is actually decreasing. So with that, the next question to the room would be, so what criteria should a restructured RIPE NCC meet? I'm not talking about full-blown solutions. Let's talk about the criteria, because we'll get to solutions eventually. But let's talk about that list of criteria.
I see Curtis
That's
going to the mic.
unexpected.
Oh, Daniel was faster.
No, it's okay. Curtis can go ahead. I was just in case nobody stood up.
Okay.
I was trying to
Curtis.
walk as slow as possible so Daniel would make it first, but
Okay.
Somebody please start.
Okay, I'll take it. Thank you for putting that back up. I think, no, hang on. Is that the one? There was the one about democratic and.
In the original RIPE 161 document.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I think you were one of the co-authors of that one, weren't you?
I don't remember. I will not.
This one.
I can neither confirm nor deny. Yeah. Basically, I think we chose an association as a structure because we wanted the democratic content of an association, and I think that's a requirement. The resistance to hostile takeover and control by any single party is something that we should still have. The last but one is to support the credible function as an industry self-regulation organization is also essential. And good service and neutrality and impartiality I already talked about, and these are the mother and apple pie of the RIPE NCC. So, and buy for profit, yeah. So you have a lot of stuff already there. Whether we want to be cheap in terms of paying taxes, I think that's something we should discuss, because the question is, at the time, this was put in because there was discussion in the membership why they should be paying Dutch taxes if they were not Dutch. Yeah. And we should check whether that still holds. Thank you.
Curtis.
Hi, Curtis Lindquist. So I was trying to put my finger on this on your previous topic because it actually touches on this. You had the word, I think it was called robust governance, right?
Yeah.
I think it was the word you used. Now, robust is not the same as good. There are two different things, right?
Exactly.
And
fine, fair.
Yeah, and I like to highlight that because in all seriousness, I think one of the things that comes back probably more in RIPE NCC structure and it comes back into the overarching part is actually governance, right? Now, the point was made earlier that the expectations on RIPE and the assets that RIPE distributes today is not the same as when 25 people got together and formed RIPE NCC, right? And I think we have to acknowledge that. And while we all would like the RIPE and RIPE NCC to have the same expectations as in 1991, that's just not the case, right? And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to understand that we are no longer the little association in the corner trying to avoid Dutch tax. And we might want to keep that in there, right? But I think that the reality is that there is much more expectations of a quite large organization who has quite large assets and who probably would be expected by most of its members to be run in a very different way. Whether that is really what we want is probably up for discussion. But I feel that a lot of the things that you mentioned in a previous topic, like trust, actually comes from that governance, right? Now, do we actually believe that this is good governance? Do we believe that that yields robust governance and therefore trust and all the other things? And I think that comes back to some of the points here about the structure is, if we start from the topic is, how do we want this to be governed? How do we actually want to control this? Because that's such a fundamental question you're asking.
Absolutely.
Okay, Pavel.
Pavel, candidate for RIPE NCC board. Honestly, when word restructured used about RIPE NCC, it scares me. I spent last months in reading thousands of pages how articles of association work, how board works, how RIPE NCC itself works, how we govern ourselves, what is the difference between RIPE and RIPE NCC. And I believe on papers, it's absolutely great foundation. We of course have some gaps in implementation, but foundation is here. And honestly, personally, I don't see that we need any significant changes. We need to do we need to find out where we have suboptimalities to address them and move forward. By making large changes, I'm an engineer, there is a high chance to break system. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Tobias Fiebig, Max Planck Institute for Informatics, speaking for myself. I would like to reiterate the point from RIPE 85 I made about digital sovereignty. And I think that that is a very important point we have to be robust against. At the moment, nation states see this internet thing and they believe they can, make sure that their rules are enforced on their constituents. We have to preserve the bottom-up self-governance of the internet, and our structure must support that. And that is one of the very big fights, which is a bit different than the defense against being taken over by a single actor. We basically try to be not taken over by a lot of somewhat headless, sometimes confused, but definitely disagreeing nation-state actors. And all of them, for example, in the EU, but also beyond.
Absolutely.
Okay, we are nearly 40 past. How long you want to go?
Let's
and we have Randy Bush in the queue.
Yeah, we have
time. We have time.
Okay, we have time.
All good.
Don't worry.
So Jim, then Peter, and Cynthia.
Yeah, Jim Reid speaking for myself yet again. I probably think that the current structure of the NCC being incorporated for some loose definition of incorporation in the Netherlands as a non-profit is probably good enough. I can't see us being able to find something different from that, but it's worthwhile having a look to see if we incorporate, say, in Luxembourg or whatever, maybe it might be better for us. I don't know. But it's certainly worth having that conversation. But I think the issue is then about the current structure is going to be then about how is that structure actually implemented, how we elect board members and what the operations of the NCC are going to be. That's maybe where the discussions would really start to concentrate on. And you touched on this before, Remco, when you mentioned that the revenue is maybe starting to decline because the membership numbers are coming down. So part of this review, in my view, is then going to be to look at the activities the NCC is doing and trying to prioritise or partition them into certain strands. What's the stuff that's really, really, really important? What the stuff is nice to have? What stuff is optional? And if we then have to get into the situation of reducing services or cutting services, we've got an understanding about where we can apply the axe and where other things could be trimmed to try and get them to fit within the budget expectations that are available. And obviously there have to be some conversations around that. But I think the idea that we can just have the NCC keep growing and growing and growing is no longer the case. And that's something I think that you were hinting at earlier. Maybe I've just made it more explicit by saying that.
Well, I mean, thanks for that statement. Indeed, that the goal of the NCC is not to grow grow into the sky. Rather, we need to, of course, look at what kind of activities we do right now. At the same time, and I've no doubt that at the next general meeting and the next RIPE meeting, there will be an extensive and lively discussion about the activity plan and budget for 2025. At the same time, I do think that if we're thinking about sort of the wider setup and the wider structure, the things that are critical and optional might shift. So in that sense, I'm also hesitant to start cutting right now into things that might be the 2 years down the line, we might actually think, oh, actually, that was kind of important.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting radical action like that, but Remco, but just first of all, having a first stab at trying to identify where things might fit, see if we get some kind of consensus view around those ideas. But of course, they're subject to change because the circumstances are going to change anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Peter Hessler, speaking for myself. Tina made a very good point earlier that we are responsible in some part for billions and billions in assets. However, I think that whatever structure we do end up with, that we need to make sure that we're not a marketplace. We're not in the business of selling IPs.
No.
And that there may be some interest in turning RIPE into that, but we need to resist it because that's not fundamental to what we want RIPE to be.
Thank you.
Cynthia?
Cynthia?
Cynthia Revström, speaking for myself. I agree with Peter and many of the other people who have already spoken up. I think the fundamental structure that we currently have is quite good. The fact that the RIPE NCC is located in the Netherlands, which has the association as like a legal concept, helps a lot in making it resilient, unlike in some other rares where they have to kind of like hack it together from other legal structures. So I don't think changing the core structure I don't think we really gain anything from that. So I think it's more about if changing anything, it's changing much smaller details. Yeah, I guess just that. I think the fundamentals are all already there, and I can't see any reason to change them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you switch Randy on?
Randy Bush from IIJ Research and Arcus. As I'm not an officer of either corporation, I am speaking for myself, but we're supposed to state our affiliations. Please do so. I, as much as anybody, wish the 90s were still here, but they're not. And unfortunately, I read the newspapers, and I think we have a little fantasy here about trust. Trust is gone. It's hard enough to find facts, right? So I think we have to realize that we're going to work in a rather untrusting environment among ourselves and between the network operators and civil society. And I think that's just life in the big city. I don't like it. Take me back to the 90s, please.
Right there with you, Randy. Thank you.
Blake?
Tina was first.
Ben?
Tina. Oh, sorry. Tina Morris, AWS, again, speaking for myself, though. First of all, RIPE NCC and RIPE community, I understand the difference. I understand why they were created that way, but I'm not convinced it needs to stay separate or that it's really anything but a construct at this point. Speaking about the board for a moment, we need strong leadership in board and staff. They need to understand their roles in good governance, and the board needs to be focused on strategic goals, high-level issues, and governance. They need to be noses in, fingers out, as a good board member should be. The board needs to trust the staff to implement plans and spend the approved budget on planned approved activities. And overall, both entities need to remember consensus does not mean unanimous in all matters. Sometimes we need to just move forward. We need board members with executive experience, security, financial, legal, sanctions, etc. We need to look for our colleagues in our companies and in our community, not necessarily in this room alone. Not to say we don't need engineers, but we don't need all engineers. Everybody on our board would benefit from nonprofit board governance training. And if you can't get these skill sets, the board should consider board advisors. Looking at trying to get candidates for this cycle, there was a statement on the website that said time commitment for board duties was impossible to measure. Impossible. That is really disappointing. You have board members that you could have pulled. Obviously, it's a variable amount for various roles. But you also have enormous staff. Leverage them to do their jobs, to prepare board materials. Take the load off of your volunteers that don't get paid anything. I tried to recruit several people for these slots. I had really great people. They all said flat out no. Not even, oh, I'll think about it for a couple of days. It was pretty much an F no. And it was because of RIPE's current status, the time commitment, the fiduciary responsibility, and the personal risk. And none of them wanted anything to do with it.
+1, I guess.
Blake. Thanks. Blake with ZAO, and also actually representing about 5 other LIRs, just with other stuff that I do. I've got a big stack of stuff here, but I want to try to summarize some little pieces of it and not blurb it out in one big blob. The first thing I wanted to mention was, I think it's worth maybe going back and defining what the community actually means, and like what an org actually is and what a member actually is, and what do we mean by that. You know, like one company can have, you know, I mean, I'm here representing like 6 LIRs, right, that I actually have a vote for, but does that, you know, does that make me larger than like a national telecom? Well, actually, maybe, you know, I think that's worth having a relook in terms of just like the fundamental architecture of how, you know, that trickles down to everything, right? It trickles down to how many votes you get and what fees you pay and all of that, right? The second thing was from a, once you maybe get a crisper definition of what the community actually is, it might make sense to have like a bit more, let's say, community representation. I mean, obviously we have the board is elected by the community, right? But it might make sense to have some kind of a community council or something a bit more informal, that's a bit more participatory with input for the members, or maybe just extend, I mean, obviously the board is already doing a ton of outreach and all of that, and that's really good and important. But I feel like maybe there are folks, or even like chunks of the services region, right, that maybe feel a little bit less represented or something like that. I mean, you can't represent, you know, however many dozens of countries it is with 7 board members, right? That's just not going to happen. So that's, I I guess, a pretty good summary of the first chunk of stuff I had. Other than that, I think that from a corporation point of view, it might make sense to look at the different options like a Societas Cooperativa Europea, a public benefit corporation, Societas Europea, B Corp. You know, there's a bunch of different financial governance structures and so forth out there that didn't exist in 1997, right? That might be more appropriate for organization like the RIPE NCC without going full blown, you know, 3 cheers for corporate, whatever. All right, thanks.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, next is over here, and we will cut the queue for now.
After Dmitry. Dmitry is the last.
Caitlin with Amazon Web Services. So I just wanted to address the line, the focus has shifted from resource distribution to registry accuracy and compliance. While I do agree that resource distribution is incredibly important, as everybody's noted, you are responsible for managing quite a bit of resources that are worth quite a bit of money. But I do think that this seems to leave out the fact that you are still also distributing IPv6 resources. So I do find it a little concerning that that was left out of the statement. I would encourage, while I do think that accuracy and all of that is very important, I don't think that we should sacrifice kind of the short to midterm or sacrifice the long-term goal for the short to midterm goal of just managing the accuracy of resources. And I also did just want to point out that you know, you also talk about compliance, and I do think that compliance needs to sort of be taken almost with a grain of salt. You know, you want to be compliant and you want to encourage your members to be compliant with your policies, but I do think that there's room for being a little bit more understanding of the community needs and knowing when you're regulating just for the sake of regulating versus actually regulating to keep somebody in compliance.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, just to be clear, registry accuracy has always been part of what we do, same as resource distribution. What I wanted to point out here is mostly that while in 1998 or 2000 to 2005, the key goal was basically get those IP addresses out there as fast as we could within the set policy. And right now, of course, you're completely right. We're still doing the resource distribution for V6, which is in a different policy framework than V4 was, certainly back then. You know, so in that sense, the focus and the amount of time that is spent now on registry accuracy and compliance. I mean, I think James Kennedy, the new chief registry officer, wrote an article about that last week. Which is actually also points out that registry accuracy is something that actually takes a lot of work.
Please.
Thank you. Malcolm Hutty from Links London Internet Exchange. Remco, could you put the previous slide up, please?
Sure.
When you introduced this with your objective, what looked to me like mission statement, you'd put a lot of careful thought into that in capturing what you believe we all think and support now.
Yeah.
And you got what I view as a really positive reception here. And I think that's a tribute to the amount of thought that went into that. But if we're going to do a structural review, we need to put the same amount of thought into what the current structure really is. This slide that you have in front of us now is a summary of a document that's more than a quarter of a century old.
I know. And
we need to have the same amount of thought that you put into that previous work into analyzing the features and aspects of our current structure before moving to the rather conclusory statements that you have on the following slide.
All right.
For example, one of the clear features of the current structure is the duality between the RIPE community and the RIPE NCC. The RIPE community is an open community. Anyone can join it. The RIPE NCC is not an open membership. It's large. It's open in the sense that a company membership can be. You've still got to pay a membership fee and you've got to qualify, you know, and these sorts of things. It's a different kind of thing. Is it still the case that we want the community to be an open community, or actually would the membership model be sufficient? That's the sort of thing that you're going to want to analyze.
Mhm.
Yeah. The relationship here is actually where the community really comes first. I know that people will quibble with what I'm about to say, but because it's only a simplification, but from a fundamental policy perspective, the community is in charge, and the NCC is a service provider to that community in the sense that it is there to implement policy, and it's the community that decides policy. And that even for, as far as the RIR functions are concerned, ICP2 says, instructs it that it's a bottom-up community that must drive it. Do we want to retain these features? If we do, we need to identify them and specify that they need to be part of whatever comes next. And if we want to change some of them, we need to have a serious debate about the implications of doing so and whether or not changing that is actually justified. Yeah, and there may well be views. I mean, for example, I think I just heard a moment ago a suggestion that actually the notion of open communities kind of past it, and I think there could be, a lively debate around those things. So we need. I don't feel comfortable with working from this slide and then moving on to the next slide as the conclusions of, well, this is based on stuff that's no longer relevant. There's a lot about the way that we work now that could be considered relevant, or maybe people want to change. We need to take that with the seriousness that you gave to the mission statement. Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. That was, you're actually very accurately describing the next 18 months of this conversation, I think.
Thank you. I'm Jan Zsakó from the nonprofit collective Hungary, speaking for myself. I think we have not mentioned enough the services and research which is done at the NCC. And if we look at the activity plan, I think there are a lot of things that we should be proud of. And it would be very bad to try to decrease the number of activities that we do. And I think we have already we have always been proud that the NCC, RIPE NCC, is kind of leader of the other RIRs in the sense of research and service implementation and so on. I think we should keep that in mind and try to keep this approach. And I'm very happy with what the NCC right now does. And I would like to keep at least at this level, if not develop it further. Thank you.
Eric.
Eric Barr speaking for himself. One of the things that I would like to at least give as a suggestion, specifically in the elections, and that's probably part for changes in the Articles of Association, is the number of proxy votes for people registering and doing board grabs. Currently, I don't think there is a limit for how many LARs you can vote with. And as a suggestion, this might actually be something that might be considered.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And on the part of contractual relationships, I think we also should have a good discussion about the sponsoring LAR discussions, the situation with that, and specifically what's coming up with the the new regulations and acts that come out of the EU, for instance, and consider that the sponsoring LAR agreements may not be the way forward. And we may actually need to look at a associate membership or something where there are direct contracts with the NCC with sponsoring LAR or PI holders, because this may not be a sustainable model in the future.
Yep.
So on the part where you say we have a declining number of members, I think I disagree with you on that, based on this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Robert Carolina. For disclosure purposes, I'm general counsel with ISC, but my comments are my own. One comment which appears to be non-controversial, but I think it's worth emphasizing, is that I'm assuming and I'm very much hoping that the organization will continue its not-for-profit focus. No one seems to be contesting that.
I would hope so, yeah.
I would just point out that if that were to ever change, it would destabilize almost everything good that RIPE can and does do. I would urge you in the strongest terms not to adopt the language of managing assets, particularly billions of dollars worth of assets, because that starts to trigger thoughts about things like portfolio management and optimizing and all sorts of other things. There's a difference between directory maintenance and asset management, I would suggest. I did want to call out, and this is the last thing I'm going to hit. Some others have touched on this. Your presentation spent a lot of time talking about the community needs or the community will or when the community does. What I haven't heard is a clear discussion or a clear focus on can we identify what we mean by the community. And along a similar line, you talk about the need to be a credible with industry self-regulation. Well, with what industry? Is it clear that you have a definition of the industry that you think is participating? And then I think the hardest question of all then becomes, if you can define the community that you're seeking to organize and represent, and if you can define the industry for which you're seeking credibility as a self-regulator, do those two functions sit comfortably with one another? Are they properly aligned with one another? And do both of those functions align properly with the goals and needs of running a regional internet registry? Is this still a single entity whose interests are fully aligned? And I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's an important question.
And I think to a large extent, that's what we're here to find out. As for the specific community things, I would very gladly refer that to the community plenary to discuss. Who is the community is a good question, I think. In terms of, I take your comments to heart about using words like asset management and so on. Ultimately, we don't get to say what the rest of the world thinks about us. I mean, in my very personal view, I don't think Cogent did the industry a favor by securitizing a large block of IPv4 address space recently and actually turning it into a securitized asset. So in that sense, we can have hopes and ambitions on what we feel the world should look like. But ultimately, most of the world doesn't really care.
So we're on top of the hour, so please keep it
so
brief.
let's do those two, and then I'm going to propose that we're, as much as everyone is excited to talk about funding, let's move that to the next time we meet or in whatever follow-up next step. So after these two comments, I would like to briefly talk about potential next steps after this, and then call it a day. We all have a nice dinner and then a social.
Good idea.
Lu Hen from Larus Limited. I think Dimitri just mentioned me. I'm the one who take everything to court. Well, I think the biggest paradox we have here is really twofold. The first of all is the increased value of IPv4. The IR was not, it has a casual start. It was not designed to come from that massive amount of asset value. It was $200 billion today. And on the other hand, we have depleted central free pool, which means we have declined membership numbers. So those two things are conflicted to each other at its core. You have an increasing value of a directory you are managing, and then you have to reduce your membership fee and operation costs in the same time. So if we go down these routes, at some point, the IR will break. And the solution to the problem is really twofold. Either in this society, we manage massive amount of asset, we go into inter-nation institutions like United Nations, ITU, and all those other things. We go higher up, put more banding, a more complicated governance structure, or we decentralize the whole thing like Bitcoins. It's really two ways to go. We either be more complicated or will be very simple. And the short-term solution of today's membership fee discussion, which is really heated in the RIPE mailing list, or the other governance change and banding put into the election campaign to prevent single-party taking over, while it's all good, despite what happened in the past few years in the corruptions, and at its core, we all realize the IIR today possesses vast amount of power. The registration database is supposed to be voluntarily recognized by each of the participants of the network has been de facto power to actually be able to turn off the internet. And this power, if it stays with the hand of this casually organized organization, it will have some severe impact for the future. National players might take over, and there are other interest parties. The bottom line is, the regional internet registry today, as it's organized, as a casual start, is vulnerable. It's very vulnerable, and it cannot sustain as today's organization structure for not even very long time. We really need to think hard what to do next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dmitro.
Oh, yeah, Dmitro Kahmanyuk, speaking for myself. Wait, good words. And let me just comment that I was not trying to accuse anybody of anything. My point is that any organization that has 20,000 members runs a risk as a company or non-profit. So I think really have to put a governance reform on the agenda. And also one of the things that I want to mention, since we have an areas council member here, we maybe don't know. In Erin, there are two kinds of members, those that do vote and those that don't. You are losing your voting right if you don't vote enough. I don't know if that would help to increase the voting number, but I think it's one of the ideas. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. And also, I think, again, referring to the previous comment, this idea of the sponsored organizations granted a second-class non-voting membership can be interesting. So yeah, it's okay to have several tiers of members and each of them would add to the income. Yeah. And Wallace's question, referring to the legal comment of the legal counsel, I see, if you do start to consider IP as an intellectual property, there is a whole big can of worms. And we should probably start with starting a trust or regulatory framework. Owning these things, you cannot manage things you don't own. And I don't think we own IP addresses, so we shouldn't probably go down this road. Okay, I guess we have lots of other topics, but I'm glad we are here. And thank you for holding the ball.
Oh, thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you. Do we have anything online? Nope.
Good. Ben,
okay.
wrap up.
Back to you.
That was extremely useful. Thank you all so much for your contributions there. So we're not going to be talking about this, sadly. Sad trombone. I do want to talk about this briefly. We've had a lot of, I personally think we've had a lot of very excellent feedback, things I missed, different directions to take, different options to take. And we don't do this very often. I mean, the last time we did any of this sort was 1997. So how do we proceed from here? I've had some brief discussions about potentially setting up a community task force. And I think that based on the discussions here today, clarifying the objective and make it measurable and achievable, and all the good stuff, everything the management book says, as well as then sort of hammering out what the criteria are for the structure, as we have it now, as we designed it back in 1997, and what we might need. So I would propose, unless someone has better ideas, that we try to set up a task force The task force will then actually, try to draft a sort of broader document around these topics to solicit input. And so I don't necessarily want like 200 people sitting on it. I don't think that'd be very productive. Ideas, thoughts?
Yeah, hi, I'm Shane Kerr, IBM, speaking for myself. What kind of task force are you envisioning? A RIPE task force?
Yeah, community.
I'm having just finished a task force. I'm not actually a big fan of that structure.
I take your point. If you have better ideas and suggestions, then please.
So I think you can accomplish a lot of the benefits of a task force without actually using a task force. So the disadvantage of a task force is that it's a closed group of people who basically aren't answerable to anyone. Now, if the outcome is expected to be a set of proposals or something like that, it's probably a bit safer because it will then be discussed by that community. But even in that structure, you're going to be able to set the terms of the discussion in a way that makes it very difficult for wider community to have participation. So I think maybe a better approach would be to maybe not do it as a task force, but you can do similar activities as you have in a task force, having discussions, having working documents and things like that, without having designated members, without having an official structure that way. So that would be my proposal. It's not, I know it sounds very half-baked because it's not even half-baked, but that's my ideas.
Thank you. That's valuable feedback.
Yes. So Tobias Siewich, Max Planck Institute for Informatics, again for myself. I would kind of like to echo into the same direction. So when I started dealing with some address policy matters, I was actually informed by, I think, Jan, that in the RIPE community, you first discuss things with the community and then you slowly form towards consensus and then you write documents, which is very diametrically different from what the ITF does, where everyone can write a draft and then you, well, agenda bash and then draft bash. It might indeed be good to have a somewhat more open frame with like document length frames where everyone can contribute and where then things can be sifted through, just because the network of people through which consensus would have to be formed before text is produced is so large and diverse that it might be good to first see some clusters emerging.
All right, thank you.
Okay, please keep your comments short and we are closing the queue after Peter. Jim.
Yeah, Jim Reed, speaking for myself yet again. I think we need some kind of organisational structure to look at this in detail and think important thoughts about the future. Whether we call it a task force or whether it comes something else, I frankly don't care. I'm also a little bit concerned with the comment Shane made about having this ongoing community consultation. Clearly the community has to be involved. But if this group, let's say call it a task force, is then going to have to keep coming back to the community to say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? This exercise will be doomed because we're always very, very slow at making decisions. So if the task force can be left with getting on with doing its work, obviously whatever comes out of that has to be discussed and analysed. But having this sort of ongoing activity while the activity is in place, ongoing scrutiny and consultation, I think we're going to never get to any kind of conclusion. I would also say, Remco, on the formation of this body, I think it's difficult to get the balance right. In some senses, we're going to have to get people who are long-standing members of the community that understand this is how RIPE has been going for a long time. But we also need perspectives from the newer members of the community and also say from the outside as well. The people who are really maybe not all that engaged in the IP and the internet type activities, but can offer perspectives, say, in the legal side of things, regulatory side of things, and have a more of a multidisciplinary approach to this. Because I think that's the way we'll try to find somewhere forward who can identify these are the landmines that are just over the horizon, so at least we can figure out how to navigate around them. And that can't be done, I think, purely from within the community itself. So I think we should try to take a broader composition of that. And I would actually go a little bit further than that and say that I think rather than seek for volunteers, obviously volunteers could maybe step forward for this, but I would think maybe the NCC board actually just decides who will be on this body and gets that endorsed by the community, but then leave them to go on with it. If we have an ongoing exercise trying to select these people and get into these complications of conflicts of interest, we're doomed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Blake
with SEO. I think maybe one of the things to do is concentrate on low-hanging fruit, maybe things that could be achieved without necessarily having to organize a task force or some other kind of organization like that. And as a suggestion, going back to my earlier comment about more representation of the historically underrepresented countries and communities in the services region, the RIPE NCC office in Dubai is a really good example of decentralizing things from Amsterdam and making folks there feel like they have someplace more local that they can be serviced from. It also reduces operating costs if you are servicing things from places that are less expensive to hire people than Amsterdam. That's just a first kind of suggestion, that could be done without having to do that. Look into business-friendly environments in places that are underrepresented.
Thank you.
Daniel.
Daniel Kahrenberg, guy with a history, speaking, employed by the RIPE NCC and speaking for himself. The RIPE 161 thing came about by discussing with the community first what the properties of the desired of the structure to be designed should be, and you listed them on that slide. There was a community discussion. It was led by a Staki, and I would recommend to replicate this process. Have one person who is stuck with actually getting community consensus on what the attributes of the structure to be designed should be. Because I think that's a not low-hanging fruit, but that's the first essential step that needs to be done. If I remember correctly, I was not one of the authors of 161 because the Staki was somebody else. And if I remember it correctly, Rob Loxile tried to make me the Staki, and I made one of my employees a Staki. So,
well done.
Just a suggestion.
Well done, you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Hi, Lu Han from Lars Limited. And I think the ultimate question here, and I agree with the previous gentleman said, the task force is really not a good way forward, because we really need to be open to the views of the entire community, not who you think your friends and you think the community is. It's the entire community, the one who actually participate in the internet, and that including network operator, including government, including people like me who lease and sell IP addresses. We're all part of this community. We're all part of this good internet. And everybody's view need to be taken into consideration. And most importantly, we need to understand constraints and the willingness of the wider community contribute to have the RIPE NCC. Because clearly, we as a community don't want to pay more, right? That has been demonstrated pretty clearly in the past few months. So if we don't want to pay more to support even the basic operation of the RIPE NCC, then how you expect the wider community want to actually have a sufficient and sophisticated institution set up to manage such massive asset? I just don't think that's going to happen. So my proposal of solution is really simple, that maybe the RIPE NCC should translate its function instead of have a deciding factor on the registration database, just being the manager of the software of the registration database, and leave that power to everybody else, i.e. distributed ledge. Thank you.
So I sort of failed to understand what this has to do with next steps, but I take your comments to heart.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Marlene with AWS. I guess for me, attending through all of the sessions over the past day or two, I've noticed that we have a lot of really talented researchers that are part of the community, and the way that they've brought about solutions or their thoughts is just taking a practical stance of surveying and using other tools to survey. I don't see why we couldn't do that as a community and put into place some surveys that'll kind of capture the voice of everyone and all the facets, and from there result in either a task force or a working group or something else.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Peter.
Peter Husser from Zayo, speaking for myself. A frequent criticism that this community has towards regulators and governments, et cetera, is when they try to work with our community or try to regulate or pass laws, they don't understand what they're doing. And when they do collaborate with us, the community, they often do it at a fairly late stage where our valuable input cannot be necessarily utilized in the best way. And I think that if we are going to look at structure, we have to be aware and admit we are not experts in corporate structure. We don't know what we're doing. And it would be very beneficial to get some experts involved early on who can help advise us on and such as Blake mentioned earlier, maybe there's other alternate corporate forms that could be appropriate. Maybe there's alternate ways of having a membership, maybe it's association, whatever, but getting experts involved who can help clarify what our possibilities are and help us design things in a good and structured way.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anything online? Nope.
All right. Well, thank you all for sticking in here. We're 18 minutes past the hour, so thank you all for coming in, participating, and my final word is I'm not. I mean, the reason I'm looking at it, I was suggesting a task force is because if you have a full room of people and you all agree that something needs to be done, everyone's going to look at each other and say, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if something got done? And I for one, am not keen to carry this on my own shoulders. So, but we'll take this back, look at the summary of what has been discussed today, and we'll do a follow-up summary at the community plenary on Thursday. And I think at that point, I've conferred with the RIPE chairs as well and RIPE NCC leadership and see how we want to structure any next steps. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening and see you at the party.